showing up. I appreciate it. Ms. Chase, I think we're still waiting for a couple board members to maybe straggle in, but if you don't mind, in the interest of time.
Sure.
Do you want to start with the open curriculum meeting for this evening?
Yes, I can do the intros. I'll do the intros right before and then hand it over to Karen.
She's at the podium.
Yes, that's true. She's ready to go. So thank you and everyone else who has decided to attend tonight. It's interesting, last week at the candidates forum for the candidates who are running for members of the Board of Education, one of the first questions was, what are the challenges facing the school district? And aside from all of the fiscal challenges that we face, Ms. Weber weighed in that she thought one of the biggest long-term challenges was attracting and retaining high-quality teachers, because graduate schools of education are graduating fewer and fewer teachers. More and more teachers are leaving the profession. There's more turnover now than there's been in many years, and we see firsthand at times how difficult it is to have high-quality, highly talented teachers to work with the students in the district. So before last week, when Ms. Weber made that comment, we had intended for this open curriculum committee meeting to be a little bit different than the ones we've run in the past. And typically what we do at open curriculum meetings is highlight one particular academic discipline, like mathematics or science or English language arts, what have you. But this time around, we wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about some of the investments we've been trying to make in recent years in our professional staff, since they're the ones who are carrying out the heavy lifting in the classrooms with all of the children. So we have with us tonight, of course, Ms. Chase, but also our directors of secondary education and elementary education, Sean Devine and Kathleen O'Connor. And the three of them are going to discuss what we've been doing in recent years, and then we've got some live testimonials from some of our best teachers in the district. So four of them are with us tonight. So having said that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Chase, and she'll round out the group here.
Thank you. So we titled the presentation Growth because that was one of the themes that emerged in our guiding principles, and it's something that we've talked about at length to really foster growth in our staff, including our new teachers, our new hires, and our current, our veteran staff. So just to give a little bit of context, this past year, the employment opportunities for the 17-18 school year, there were 33 total positions available, and 25 of those were for tenure track positions and 8 were leave replacements. And you could see by the number of applicants that we have a lot of interest in people coming on board, which requires our administrators and supervisors and principals to do a lot of screening of candidates, and a lot of time is spent in picking the best candidate. So once we, and also too, you know, this human resources has a lot of advertising to do and then a lot of work with onboarding of these folks. So once we get these people on board, we want to make sure that we have really strong supports in place to continue to foster growth and their development. So I speak a lot about growth, probably more than people want to hear.
No. We always...
We want to hear everything you have to say.
But I think one of the reasons that I often think about this topic is because it's a theme that emerged this past summer when the admins got together and we talked about why we do what we do. And it surfaced in the guiding principles. And the one I really want to speak to tonight is this idea of growth through ongoing collaboration, feedback, self-reflection, and service to others. We often speak about wanting our students to be lifelong learners, and we want them to grow in the classroom. And we recognize that in order for us to properly support our students, we have to believe that ourselves from all levels of the organizations, from the central office to the admins and to the teachers. So this is basically what I speak to when I talk about growth. There's this idea about expertise, and some people believe that expertise is the possession of a certain knowledge base. However, what's happening right now with teaching is and the world in which we live, things are changing so rapidly that it's no longer, expertise is no longer to just possess knowledge, but it's the desire to want to continue to learn. And John Hattie, who is well respected in the field of education, had this quote that I pulled out, and it spoke to expert teachers, and they believe that intelligence is changeable rather than fixed. And basically, there are two ways to view intelligence, and one is it's fixed. It's either innate or not, and the other idea is that it's malleable and you could change it. Expert teachers believe that intelligence is something that they could develop over time, both within themselves and within their students. So in other words, there's always growth to be made in all areas. So I found this graphic, and it speaks to the idea of what one knows versus what one actually knows. So what one thinks one knows and what one actually knows. This touches on the idea of learning in relation to these areas. So early in one's career, you may think you know more than you actually do. And we see that a lot in our new staff. They come out of college and they're new to the district, or they've been in a former district, and they feel like they know a lot. And that's fantastic. We want to encourage that. But as time continues, what happens is more knowledge develops. And ultimately, the more knowledge you gain in the field, the more you realize that there's more to the discipline than you ever really knew initially. So there's a point that people speak to, and it's called the humility threshold. And the point at which these two areas intersect is actually called the humility threshold. In other words, you learn that the more you know about something, the more there is always to know. And that's really a concept that we want to drive home with our staff, so that there's this idea of ongoing, forever learning for both teachers and students. We also speak to the idea of better. Atul Gawande is a writer and a surgeon, very accomplished, and he actually wrote a book, Better, that Dr. LaSouza gave to me my first year here in the district, and it's stayed with me. And we like this quote, and we actually use it a lot with our new teachers. But basically, it supports the idea that being better doesn't mean you're a genius, but it's a desire and a willingness to try. And we here in the district want to create a supportive environment for our veteran staff and our new staff, so that they understand that trying and working towards learning is something that we value. So these are very conceptual ideas, and sometimes it's a little bit too much in the ether. So we always want to talk about how do we make this happen within the organization. So we're really talking about how do we foster the importance of growth, the desire to be better, and the redefinition of expertise when our teachers are very, very busy on a regular basis. So when you look to the channels of professional development for teachers, and we use the Danielson framework for teaching, and this is actually a quote by Charlotte Danielson. Most important from here is what I pulled out for the bottom, and it's the idea that it's never perfect. No matter how good a lesson is, it could always be improved. And that's something that we have really thought a lot about with many of the things that we've done, including our observation and evaluation process, where we do not average teacher scores. We look at them at the end and how much they've grown over time. So when we think about these ideas, like I said, they're very large, they're out there. Now we have to make them a reality. So I call these dials. These are the structures that we have in place already that will help us create a culture and build capacity for these ideas. And I will speak to one of them, which is the different perspective, and then I will hand it over to Kathleen O'Connor and Sean Devine to talk about the other two, which are our new staff programs, which Sean and Kathleen run, and the reflective practices, which is something that Sean and Kathleen play a huge role in. The first thing is the observation and evaluation process. And I like to call it a different perspective because I believe it's less ominous. Basically what you have is another person coming into the classroom to watch you do your craft or do your thing. And as I mentioned here in Chatham, we utilize the Danielson framework for teaching and learning, and in a nutshell, the observation process is basically a quantitative method, and the observer will go into the classroom and record a series of behaviors that are observed through the observation. And what that does is it focuses on the frequency at which these behaviors have occurred and the types of behaviors that have happened. And once the observer has gathered this data, they measure it against a set criteria. Now, both the observer and the teacher are very familiar with the criteria by which this judgment or evaluation is taking place. Everybody has been trained, and it's the language of our discipline that we use in teaching. It's our jargon, per se. A few of the things that we went over and make sure that we have consistent with regard to our observation systems is that we're all using the same terminology. That's really important. When you're talking about the language of a job or a career, you want to make sure that everyone's speaking about the same thing. So we have, language, for example, we talk about classroom management, we talk about engagement and learning. These are terms that are consistent throughout K through 12. And we also had training procedures for both the admins and for our staff. On an annual basis, we review the rubric and the process that we will be using for observations, which is basically this. It consists of 3 parts, which is a pre-observation conference, the majority of the time. And during this time, the observer and the teacher will speak about the goals of the lesson and how the teacher plans to bring students to those learning outcomes. And then the observation will take place, and that's when the evidence is collected. And then after the event occurs, the observer actually shares the evidence that has been collected with the teachers, and they have a conversation about what had been observed during that time. And that conversation, from what we hear from our admins, is actually the most valuable part of the process, because that's when the observer becomes the teacher and the teacher becomes the learner. And that's really getting at the heart of what we're trying to do here when we support growth and learning in our staff. So I will turn this over to Kathleen.
Okay, so the new staff programs. We have a new staff orientation, which happens 4 days in August, the week before school starts. And during that time, we work with the teachers. We do a district technology with them. We have the head of student services, special services. He does something about special needs students with the new teachers. We have discussions about student wellness. We also introduce them to the Danielson framework for teaching that Karen was just talking about. And the thing that's relatively new, which we only started last year, was introduction to growth mindset. So we go over what is meant by a growth mindset and just sort of let them become familiar with it. And then we meet with the first-year teachers once a month for the entire year. And the overarching question that we're really focused on during that time is, how does mindset impact teaching and learning? And the teachers are all given, the new teachers are all given copies of the Mindset book by Carol Dweck. And we discuss that in monthly meetings. We also have them all in a Google Classroom. And they are asked to respond to the book, and then they also respond to each other's comments through the classroom as well. And then we also respond to them. So there's a lot of responding going on. But so we're essentially having a virtual conversation via Google Classroom. And one thing I want to point out is that really what we see our role is showing the teachers what we want them to be doing in their classrooms. So we do want them to be using Google Classroom as long as it's appropriate for the learner, if they're old enough to be doing that. And we try to model the type of things that we want them to be doing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the introduction to the framework for teaching. So we spend an entire morning going through the Danielson framework, and we lead them through different activities. So we want them to be learners that are actively engaged in what they're doing, rather than us just kind of spoon-feeding it to them. And you will see in a couple of slides later that seems to be one of the highlights of the new teacher orientation, which is kind of remarkable since it can be a very dry subject. But we've made it very interesting, and they enjoy that part. And then we also have change the new teacher institute from 1 year to 2 year, and our year 2 teachers will be part of the reflective practice. And Sean's going to be talking about that a little bit more shortly. So they get to do an action research, and then at the end of the year, they will present that action research to us and to the year 1 teachers. So we're constantly kind of trying to not reinvent the new teacher, but certainly be getting to know the teachers better, trying to learn about them as learners, trying to develop empathy for them so that they do that for their own children. So they're our students. And there's a lot of things that we do. We do assessment, we do differentiation, many different things. Student engagement, classroom environment is of course one of the first things that we do. So everything that we do is related to the framework, and we try to bring them through activities so that they can be using those within their classrooms as well.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the reflective practice program that we run. We run it in 2 different capacities. One is with, as Kathleen said, the year 2 teachers, the teachers who are in the 2nd year at Chatham. And we also run a program with the teachers who have received a highly effective rating from the prior year. That was a recent program that was instituted by the state, and Chatham was lucky enough to be one of the districts that piloted that program and had a lot of input in terms of how to make that program a little bit better statewide. And we've had a pretty good response by our staff in terms of taking advantage of that program, not only in the pilot year, but for the last 2 years as well. The reflective practice, when it's put into practice, it starts with a focus area. And one of the things that we try to communicate to the teachers is, as Karen said, we talk about better a lot, but the teaching profession that involves a lot of decisions on a daily basis. It's a complex task, and without a focus area to sort of narrow your field of view in terms of what you want to look at over an entire year, it could become a pretty cumbersome process, and that's not really what we want to impart on the teachers. So we share that if they could focus on a limited area of what they do on a daily basis, they'll have a better chance of finding answers to their questions that will help them become better, help them have a positive impact with their students. Once they've developed an area of focus, which I'm sure the teachers will talk about in a little bit, they work to gather different sources of evidence. Primarily those are through videos. They're also through examples of student work, and they're through the student voice. And the way that we collect the student voice is through student surveys, and the student surveys differ a little bit depending on the grade level that the students are, the teachers have in front of them. But the reason for that is that the teachers throughout the year formulate sort of an opinion of what the evidence says, and then we like to validate that with the input from the students as well. Throughout the year, they collect the data, they meet with administrators, and they formulate a conclusion. At the end of the year, they either through a presentation or a write-up communicate what their findings are, and hopefully validate what it was that they were trying to focus on at the beginning of the year.
John, I'm sorry, who do they communicate those findings to?
With the new teachers, it's more of among themselves, and with the staff that are tenured, it's with an administrator who they work throughout the year with.
Okay.
And one of the resources that we use is a book called Creating a Culture of Reflective Practice by Pete Hall and Alyssa Simmerall. And what we're hoping to do through these two programs is to create a culture where reflective practice is valued and becomes more commonplace. And the goal is for the staff to really understand their content, the students in front of them, the pedagogy, and as they consider those things each given year, to take deliberate action within the classroom. That deliberate action will then, impact a variety of different decisions that they make throughout the year, and as they assess those decisions, they'll adjust their course of action. And our goal is that this is a way that when you have a complex task, you can sort of isolate certain things that go on within the classroom and research them in a way that you can make a positive impact throughout the year. And that if we can get more and more staff involved, either through the highly effective model or as new teachers come through the NTI program, is they become aware of this reflective practice and it becomes more ingrained it becomes more of a practice that they try to incorporate into their own reflection of their lessons on a more regular basis, that our staff gets better and better every year.
Okay, so the reflective practice really is aligned to what we're doing with growth mindset, because teachers are allowed to choose their own area of research. So we are differentiating their professional development. And it becomes very real because they're using their own students as, the people that they're researching. So it really has a positive effect in terms of what they're doing in their classroom. And then, as you'll see, generally they'll end up with more questions at the end. But that's what we want to do. So it's a constant cycle of learning and reflecting and getting better. And so these are some staff feedback. We always survey our teachers after the new teacher orientation. We'll be surveying them about the different meetings that we do with them on a monthly basis. We're constantly trying to get feedback from them, be responsive to them as learners, and try to help them along the way. We've also, really sort of given them permission to make mistakes, because we believe that that's where we learn, when we make mistakes. And we think if, we want to have growth mindset culture in a classroom, that the teacher has to really believe in growth mindset and promote that within their own children, that it's okay to make a mistake. That's when you learn the most. And so that's kind of where all this came from. And these are just quotes straight from the new teachers. They've used growth mindset in their classes this year. They enjoyed being able to collaborate with other new teachers. And I like participating in growth mindset activities because it helps me to understand my students' point of view. One of the things that I think about a lot is, like, how do you develop empathy for the learner? Because I think if you have empathy for your students, then you really can respond to them, not just in an academic way, but also on a personal level. And I believe that really impacts them, that they think, my teacher really believes in me. My teacher knows that I play soccer or I play an instrument, and you make connections with them, and those connections really foster learning. So that's something that we talk about often. Reflecting on teaching for each individual learner has helped me be mindful in preparing and establishing routines and teaching lessons. This person really liked the Danielson framework to be most valuable as an important tool to drive our instruction. So then last year, after we did the reflective practice, we created a survey, and we had some very positive findings from that survey. Over 95% of those surveyed identified reflection as an important practice. 90% of those surveyed felt that reflective practice enhanced their effectiveness. And 95% of those surveyed would choose to participate in the reflective practice again. And that's essentially what I'm seeing. I think I had one teacher who decided not to do it again this year. She had done it for the past 2 years, so she just decided she was going to go for the long observation.
And Kathleen, if you don't mind asking, is there any way to quantify, like how much time is that in a day, a week, a month, or is it iterative and part of the process throughout the year, or you can't quantify it? Like how much time is being spent on that, or is it just something you kind of do at the end of the day, like we used to do with our daily planners, you know? You check off those things you've accomplished and you moved up the things that you
You
completed.
mean in terms of the action research?
Yeah, action research.
Well, that's a good question.
Reflective, even the, communication back to the peers or supervisor. I'm just curious if you could quantify
I
it.
couldn't right now. I'd have to think about it a
Okay,
little bit.
or
But I
even
mean, I've
ask-
spent like the past 2 weeks really meeting with everyone who's participating in the practice from K-5 that I'm observing, having conversations with them about what they're doing and, helping them develop what their focus question is. So it takes time, but that's something that I really enjoy doing because it's interesting to the teachers and it's real to them.
And productive.
And productive, and you'll be hearing what they did. So
Okay.
I think they can speak to it better than I can.
I didn't want to
actually.
put them on the spot, so I figured I'd put you on the
Oh,
spot.
okay. Well, that's all right. I don't mind. But we do want them to talk about it. That's why they're here.
Okay. Sometimes we, put things on folks that we think is a great idea, and in practice, it's an albatross. And I was just curious what the balance is. And I don't know, I'm not in education, so if I don't speak your jargon, I apologize. But I do know at work things are thrust upon me, and to me it's just checking a box and sometimes getting through it, and sometimes, gosh, this was really well worth my time, and I would do it again. I'm just curious where that falls in your area of expertise.
Well, I would say the pilot was voluntary. So that was the first year.
That's
And only highly effective teachers can participate in lieu of a long observation.
Okay.
So it's replacing one of their long observations.
I was saying, and I apologize, I didn't want to interrupt Sean twice, but since you mentioned the highly effective program, what percentage of the teachers generally achieve, in the first or second year that rating? Again, if you can't answer now,
I don't have that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
you know where to find me.
We had 63 teachers participated last year,
Okay,
and this year we have 71.
okay. And it's
So-
voluntary?
Yes,
And it's voluntary.
that's correct. Yes.
But Jill, what you said is important because
Oh, wait, say that again?
what you said is so very important.
Sorry.
Very, very. Because we often have discussions about the ideas that we have and putting them on teachers, and we want to make sure that we don't give teachers just more work. So we look and discuss a lot of ways in which we can take things that they're currently doing and either tweak them or lessen them and make room for something else so that we're not just overburdening them and making them work harder and not necessarily better. And teaching is hard work.
Very.
Very, very difficult work. And, that's why we feel it's very important, too, to survey our staff to find out what they think of things that we've put into place, because they're going to give us the most honest answer because they're living it.
Are
So
they anonymous surveys? Because if I was a first-year teacher, I'd tell you whatever you
they're
want to hear.
anonymous.
They're anonymous, okay. Just to be cynical, I want to keep my job, I'm going to,
We were the response from the reflective practice has been
Okay.
amazing.
Okay.
It's just, even when I talk to other school districts, they are just amazed by the number of people we have interested, and I just think that speaks a lot to our teachers. And we do want to hear from them, but before I ask our teachers to present, I have to just thank Kathleen and Sean and let you all know that they also model this idea of better and learning and growth mindset, and they're always thinking, and they're always reading, and they're always learning, and I think that comes across in everything that they do with the new staff. So you not only model great classroom practices, but you model this whole idea of what we're looking to forward, and I just wanted to publicly thank you for that. So now we have the real stars of the show, which are the teachers, right? So we have Matthew Weinschenker and Megan Militello, and I believe you two are here to speak about the New Teacher Institute. And then we have Sue Keating and Shannon Faulkner, who are going to be speaking about the reflective practice experience. So if I could just invite you up here, and maybe you could just tell us the truth. How did you like it?
How are they going to tell you the truth with you standing there?
I'll leave. Yes, ma'am.
And if you wouldn't mind introducing like what grade or
Yes.
area of, that you teach, and which one of you is Matthew? I'm just kidding.
Sure. My name is Megan Militello, and I'm a first grade teacher at Southern Boulevard School. This is my third year teaching in the Chatham School District, and it is my fourth year in the district. I started off as a paraprofessional in third grade, and then I got hired as a tenure track teacher in first grade. New Teacher Institute was particularly very helpful, and it's funny that Kathleen mentioned the Danielson framework, because that was the one day that I was going to mention. And the activities that we did, I remember it like it was yesterday. They had asked us to write a memory that we had from back in school, elementary school, high school, any memory, and then some of us volunteered to share our memories. And it was pointed out that everyone's memory dealt with domain 2, which was the classroom culture. No one really remembered the fractions lesson or how to add or the reading by Shakespeare. It was all a teacher really touched them or was compassionate toward them or helped them out with the life, something that was going on in their lives at the time. And that's really what struck me, and it stuck to me that, wow, I really have to make it a goal of mine that, first day of school, that's what I'm going to focus on, is really getting to know my students and creating that classroom culture, because as important as it is to have, best method practices and really know your content, if the students don't feel safe, if they don't trust you, then they're not going to be open to learning, no matter how well you are of a teacher. So that really stuck to me, Domain 2 and all the framework, the Danielson framework, because I never really had seen that book before. So and it gives you an attainable goal. It tells you what a basic teacher is, what a proficient teacher is, what a highly effective teacher is. So it gives you something to work toward. So that was very helpful. And doing the reflective practice also, as Sean had mentioned, there's so many things, and Karen Chase mentioned every lesson can be better. So I'm thinking, this is what I want to do in math, this is what I want to do in ELA, this is what I want to do in science, and it becomes a little overwhelming. So doing the reflective practice, I said, okay, my one goal that I wanted to focusing on was my questioning technique. I started to realize that a lot of the answers I was getting was very one-worded, especially in math, it was just numbers. And I teach first grade, so they're 6 and 7, so they're still young. But I really wanted to figure out a way to really see what they were thinking, have them, evidence. How did they get to this answer? To help me as a teacher, are they really getting it, or are they just coming up with some answer? So I did some research, and to answer your timeline question, we had months. This was most of the school year. So I was able to have time to really think, what was an important question, something that I wanted to research. Then I had time to do that research. I had time to implement that research with the students. I recorded myself with a video, which was kind of funny to watch, but I watched that, and I was very animated, more so than I thought, but I guess it works. And I also recorded some of the student responses, and I was able to see from the beginning of the year toward the end that a lot of the students really were, in first grade, even the simple thing as using the word because, by the end of the year it was a habit. They were able to give me an answer and then explain because, why did they think that answer? And it did raise more questions, because I said one of my goals, my beginning was my questioning technique, and it kind of ended turning up into how do I foster effective discussion? So student-led discussion, where it wasn't just me questioning, and prompting, where really a student brought up, or I brought up a prompt, and they were able to piggyback off each other and add on to each other. So even if student A wasn't able to explain it in their own words, student B can kind of piggyback off of that student and go along with it. And I also noticed a lot more of that as well. And now coming into this year, I was like, okay, come day one, we're introducing the word because. And now already, we're in the beginning of November, and they're starting to get the hang of it. So I was like, that's great. And now that goal has met and been accomplished. I'm already implementing it. Now we can focus on something else that I would like to do. So kind of like an informal reflective practice. But it was very helpful.
Excellent, very good. Thank you, Megan. Happy to meet somebody that actually talks faster than I do.
That was another thing I know I have to work on.
You and me both. I'm still working on it, but...
No, it's not only me.
No.
Good evening.
I
am
think it's
Matt
efficient.
There we go, I'm gonna go with that.
Sorry, Matthew.
Yep. Good evening. My name is Matt Weinshanker. I teach 6th grade social studies over at the middle school. Thank you for having me tonight. And I'm happy to talk about my experience participating in the NTI Year 2 program. So throughout my career, and this is my 3rd year here, and I had taught in a different district before here, I've always practiced reflection. I've done reflective projects, reflective journals. I've literally taken notes on my lesson plans themselves, Post-its, notepads, my hand, whatever I could think of, even in the midst of a lesson if I wanted to change something up. But NTI gave this unique opportunity to not just get my own input as I was thinking about how things were going, but also get input from my peers and from administrators and sort of get the perspective of other people. So it wasn't just my reflection, but I could get feedback and then reflect on that. And just going along with the reflection, it wasn't just the people in the room, but actually a couple of people talked about the mindset book, which I had actually brought with me. But using the mindset book and sort of synthesizing my own reflection and everybody else's input going along with Dweck's text was really helpful in sort of revisiting some of the practices I was doing and seeing if they were effective. So one of the issues that I saw being a 6th grade social studies teacher is that I was focusing on ancient world histories. That's the curriculum. And sometimes I got a bit concerned that the students weren't really making the connections, that they weren't really seeing themselves, their own lives, current events, and things that were taking place 5 million years ago, 1 million years ago, 500,000, and even 1,000 years ago. So because of that, I had the focus of my project to help students better understand ancient world history topics by connecting material to their lives. And so I created this research question: are my students able to connect ancient historical themes to the present day? So one of the things that was really helpful was the videotape lesson. We recorded ourselves, so I did my first one in February of last year and my second in May. And I was obviously looking to see how I was doing, and I studied everything from the speed of my voice to the tone and the volume, and even where I walked, and was I walking in a place around the room that was helpful or not helpful. But then I really was studying the content, and one of the things I noticed early on in the year is that when we were having discussions about the topics that I was writing about for my project, I noticed that I wasn't really asking the probing questions that were having the students think a bit deeper about the topics we were working on. So by the time I did the May 2017 videotape lesson, I was asking a lot more follow-up questions like, what does that tell us? Why do we think? I looked at a few different topics. So why do those topics exist over time? How are they effective over time? So that was really helpful. As we were doing this, I had the students keep a journal. And so that was my data collection method. Essentially, we looked at 3 different units. So the first one was on ancient achievements. Ancient government was the second. And the third was ancient trade. And I used current events as kind of the vehicle for students to reflect on those past events and connect them with today. So essentially, they were answering the questions: in what ways are ancient governments or ancient achievements or ancient trades similar to today? In what ways are they different? And they had to use specific examples. From the start of the year throughout the end, I had a number of different interventions. So the first, like I said, was to introduce current events as sort of that vehicle for them to make the connections. And then I would model how to make the connections, have students practice, discuss, and write. And so I do have some quantitative conclusions. In January, when we first began to work on this connections activity, well, it was leading up, but January was the first time I measured, about 66% of the students were able to make the connections that events that happened in the past actually impact us today, or they're connected in some way. By March, that 66 had turned into 73%, and then by the last time I measured, it went to 82%. So essentially, when I looked at growth in addition to just the raw numbers, students by the end of the year were up to about 91% the interventions were effective for. So that was really impressive, and it helped me to sort of reflect on my practices, what worked the best, what didn't work so well. And because I measured 3 times but throughout the year, I was sort of getting feedback from the students. It was really helpful to get a sense of what am I doing that's working, what's not working, and what can I take with me for the future. So I know the idea here is to discuss the impact of NTI Year 2, and I would say it was really impactful because even from January to May, I saw an impact, and now right off the bat, starting this year, I've worked to make those connections, and And one of the activities we did very early on, we were looking at Neanderthals. That was one of the early topics we talk about. And I found this article about researchers looking at plaque in the teeth of Neanderthals and finding all the things that have been fossilized over time. And they saw that they probably had aspirin or some form of aspirin, and that was helping to make some connections. So things that students didn't even realize were common across large time periods, they were able to see because of this project and because of me revisiting my teaching. So I for sure felt it was impactful in a really helpful way last year. I've already started to use some of those reflective findings that I had, and I plan to continue to do that.
Excellent.
Matthew?
Yes.
First of all, congratulations. And when I hear these processes taking place where you're constantly analyzing and going back and reflecting on your performance, it obviously shows teachers who aren't checking the box, but teachers who care a great deal about their craft, which is why I'm congratulating you.
Thank you.
I do have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned at one point you noticed that you weren't asking questions that were probing enough to get them to engage, to make these connections. And my question is, did you notice it, or did peers help you out, peers observing you, help you make that observation?
So it's something I would think about. Oftentimes going into a lesson, I think about maybe the misconceptions students have or try to anticipate questions. And so you have that kind of in your mind that this might be a probing question I want to ask, or this might be a direction. So I really did try to focus on that on my own. Sometimes when you're in the lesson, you kind of, for one reason or another, don't get to some of those questions. But after watching the video and I would say discussing with my peers, but really the reflective video was really helpful. I saw that I had missed opportunities. Like I was looking at, oh, I should have asked that, or I could have asked this here. So I think that the video was the most impactful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sue Keating, and I'm in my 16th year of teaching in Chatham. I'm at Southern Boulevard currently in 2nd grade. I was for 12 years at Lafayette School teaching 4th or 5th grade, primarily language arts. So I had an opportunity to come over to Southern Boulevard while Ralph Pespain was still there. He was my kids principal at Milton many, many, many years ago. And I had an opportunity to go to teach 2nd grade, which is a completely different animal than 4th and 5th graders. But I had so many people tell me that 2nd grade was just a really incredible year to teach. People's in their careers, 2nd grade was their favorite year. So I went in, and my first year, Kathleen was there for me. I really wasn't quite sure what was going on, but I slowly figured it out. And I taught language arts at Lafayette, and so that was my area where I felt my strength was, where my real interest was. But I knew I'm just a reflective person by nature. Things that, any lesson that I ever taught all the time, I always thought about what could I have done differently, how could I have engaged the kids in a different way, what should I have done that I didn't do. I'm just reflective by nature. So when the opportunity to become part of the pilot 3 years ago came in, it was my opportunity to say, you know what, I'm teaching 2nd grade now. I do feel like I know what I'm doing with language arts instruction, whether it be reading or writing, but I knew there were ways that I could be better. And the first year I did my project was combining 2 new programs we were doing. We were doing Reader's Workshop, Lucy Calkins model, and we had new materials that were purchased for us called comprehension clubs, getting kids to read a similar book in small groups. And they were always 2 completely separate models, and I thought, how can I blend these 2 models to work most efficiently and effectively and have the kids really grow in their conversations with each other in shared text, conversations of shared text while keeping within the Lucy model. And I really, it was awesome. I just was really happy with how it all turned out. I will completely admit that I have, after watching myself in videos for 16 years, my students had to listen to this voice, and it's really like, it's not fun at all. It's very uncomfortable to watch myself. But you learn a lot. That year I had my video in different spots so I could watch what was going on in the room while I was working with smaller groups of kids. And I thought, okay, there's a work in progress with trying to figure out how to manage mostly 7-year-olds. But then my second year I realized one of the components of instruction in second grade that's so valuable is small group instruction. And I just felt like that was an area I wanted to see if I could improve on. So I chose my reluctant readers and my reluctant writers to work in a small group with, and worked with them on goals, worked with them on meeting them where they were and trying to grow them in small steps along the way with more regular check-ins. This model helped me focus and narrow an area where I really wanted to spend my time and make it better. And it worked. I honestly felt like the students that I focused on, and they were reluctant based on survey results that I gave at the beginning of the year. I gave a survey in the middle of the year and at the end of the year, and just kind of focused on the results from those surveys. And the beginning to the end of the year was very rewarding to see that they really weren't as uncomfortable or reluctant to say that, you know what, I kind of like this kind of writing or that kind of writing. It came from giving them some kind of small and attainable goals. This year I want to focus on, we do a lot with reading goals with kids, and getting a 7-year-old to understand what's a goal and how do I work toward it and how do I meet it. And I've never really done writing goals per se, giving them small attainable goals that they can work on, check back in with me, and it can become kind of a give and take thing. So that's the area of focus that I would like to do this year. I really have to thank Kathleen for the past 2 years doing it and now starting my third, how supportive and helpful. She's always sending things that she finds for us to read, publications, things on the internet. And I feel through this reflective process very supported. And I've really enjoyed it. And I do feel also one other thing, it feels like it feels professional. It feels like this process meets us as professionals and lets us look at it in a professional way, that we are looked at as learning and wanting to grow and wanting to be better, and then that support again has been wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Keating. It's nice to hear from a veteran and seasoned teacher. I was a little curious, is this something that is just, for new teachers, or, as you change your practice and your craft, can you also incorporate it? So it's nice to hear that from you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shannon Faulkner. I teach English at the high school. This is my 14th year teaching and my 8th year here in the district. So I started the reflective practice process last year with Sean, and I chose also to focus on conferencing in the Writer's Workshop model. And I'd been using a Writer's Workshop model for a number of years, but I wanted to incorporate mentor texts as a component of writing conferences within the model. So a mentor text is like a kind of model text for students, so within the genre that they're currently working in. So for example, if my students are writing editorials, I would pull 8 to 10 editorials, we would read them together, analyze them for structural approaches that the author takes or craft moves that the author incorporates. And then I wanted to bring those those texts into the individual conferences that I had with students in a meaningful way to help them improve their craft of the, say, editorial that they were writing. So part of the methodology for the reflective practice, as you've heard, is the video of yourself teaching. So I videotape myself conferencing. And then in looking at the video and comparing that to student work, one of the things that I came to realize is that in my less effective conferences, I was kind of jumping right from where the student introduces a struggle. You know, I'm not really sure how to end this, or I've got this fact that I need to work in, but I'm not sure where to put it. In the less effective conferences, I would sort of jump in and be like, oh, you know, here's a great spot. What about right here in paragraph 2? Or, you know how you could end this piece? I've got a great idea for you. And while these might have been wonderful ideas, like I was definitely taking ownership away from the students' writing and also doing a lot of the hard work for the student. I mean, that's the hard part, is figuring out how to do this stuff. So in watching the video, I revised the conferencing practice so that I would kind of turn the question back around on the student and draw in the mentor text, where I might say something like, okay, you need to incorporate a fact into this editorial. Did we read any mentor texts where you saw a lot of facts? And the kid might say, oh yeah, you know that one that we read about the science march or whatever. And I'd say, okay, well, let's look back at that text. Where do you see the facts? How does the writer introduce it? Do you think that you could take that approach in your piece as well? So those conferences, the mentor texts are now like a central component of the conference, and I'm directing the student back to as more of a facilitator of the student's learning process than just kind of imparting my own expertise. And so it was looking at the conferences on the video that made me realize, like, wow, I'm on fire when I'm doing that, and then sometimes I'm not doing that, and I'm not giving that student the same experience. So the other thing I learned from the video was that I just needed more familiarity with those texts. It was the first year that I had integrated that component into my classroom, mostly because my supervisor, Heather Rocco, had given me this book to read over the summer called Writing with Mentors, and I just loved it. I loved the whole approach, and I really wanted to bring it into my classroom. But I didn't own those texts the way that I would own like Hamlet or the Metamorphosis or something that I've taught for, you know, years and years. So part of it I understood as just, you know, this is the first year of a new program, but then I also went back and reread those texts so that when I'm sitting down with a student, those things are fresher in my mind. I can immediately think of 2 or 3 examples that might be helpful to the student, point him or her in that direction. So it was definitely helpful for my students, unquestionably, but I just wanted to echo Sue in saying that for me as a teacher, Mike said at the beginning that it is difficult to attract and retain quality teachers, and for me, it just felt very gratifying to see that the district honored my professionalism, and I think all effective teachers, we spend a lot of our professional time, but also a lot of our personal time trying to become better at our craft, learn more about our discipline and our pedagogy, and then seeing that kind of invited into the process of evaluation just felt very gratifying, and I felt very thankful to be in a district that takes that approach. So, thank you.
And how many years, Shannon, have you participated in the reflective process?
I'm doing it again this year. Last year was my first year.
Okay, and this is your second year?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Did anybody else have any questions for Shannon? You bringing us home here, Karen?
Well, I just want to thank the teachers who are really the superstars, and just say, like, I'm blown away. I said earlier at one of the meetings to the elementary folks, I actually want to change the term teaching to engineering, because you're engineering, you're designing things outside of the classroom, you're tweaking them when they're happening, and then you're evaluating, you're gathering data, and it's very, very complicated, and I just want to thank you for continuing to be better and to reflect, and it's just an honor to be able to do these things for you. Do you have anything else? Great. Thank you so much.
Just a quick question, if you don't mind, Karen.
Sure.
You touched on the observation piece. I mean, we spent a lot of time on the reflective piece, but how often or how frequent are teachers observed when they don't do the reflective process? They do the more traditional.
So all of our tenured teachers are observed 2 times a year. They
Is there a concept of a long and a short?
yes,
I've heard you speak
there
of
is
that.
one long observation where the observer stays for the entire lesson for that discipline or
Pop-in or, sorry,
subject.
I apologize. Is it a pop-in or is it announced?
It's an announced one. So
Okay.
there is the pre-observation conference, and what that enables, what that fosters is the teacher is then able to clearly convey to the supervisor what the objective of the lesson was, what the intended outcomes are, and the thought process that was surrounding the decisions made with regard to the instruction. Then there's a short. Now our tenured teachers have 2 longs and 1 short. Our non-tenured teachers have 2 longs and 1 short. So it happens several times throughout the year, and also there's always frequent pop-ins or visits or a teacher asking an observer to come in and watch them try something new, which is something we always want to foster.
Great.
So it happens frequently.
Okay, thank you. And I know we only have a couple minutes left, and I know there's only a couple of folks here, residents, non-staff members. Do you have any questions? I'm not putting you on the spot, I just, if nothing, don't feel you have to. I just wanted to, if you had something that struck your fancy. If not, you could always email it to Karen, since
And
there's
the-
only 3 of you here.
The presentation will be posted online.
Okay. Well, thank you, I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you, Kathleen, thank you, Sean. Thank you for, I know you had such a long day, thank you for coming out, it was excellent.